Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast. This is How Legacy ESPs Have Failed Enterprise Marketers, brought to you by Message Gears. My name is Will Devlin. I'm the Senior Marketing Director here at Message Gears, and I'm joined today by Chris Brown, our VP of Account Management. Chris has been in the industry for a little over a decade, worked with brands all over the world on email marketing, and is our resident consumer insights guru. So we're going to have a conversation today. So Chris, before we dive into it, we will be taking questions throughout. If you want to submit a question, go ahead and put that in the chat today. We'll have some time at the end. We'll answer some questions as they're coming in. So let's dive in. Title of the webinar, get it out of the way, how legacy ESPs have failed enterprise marketers. So we need to define that a little bit. What is a legacy ESP and how we're defining it for today's discussion?
Sure. Well, I think it's good to call out that SaaS has worked, these legacy SaaS ESPs have worked great for many years. They solved a big problem. Marketers didn't really have to involve their IT teams for many years. They were kind of set up and go. But there's a big difference between the past and what we're seeing today. In the past, the lists were much smaller, the amount of consumers that they would have on their list. And also the big piece is that the personalization was much simpler. We used to make a joke about how, some emails look like you just took a Pottery Barn catalog, tore the page out, and slapped it in an email. That was it. Some of them didn't even have a, personalization on your first name, Dear Chris, something along those lines. So ones that did were probably more just of a mail merge really than anything else. So much simpler, much, smaller files being transmitted. Really the only difference was, who's being added to the list, who unsubscribed, that's it. And those are things that, a SaaS, legacy, ESP could have handled well for you. The other big difference is that the consumers were far different. Their expectations, the bar that they set for what they expected to receive, much more simple. Today, they expect through other vehicles such as the website, through other companies, Amazon, Walmart, they expect the personalized experience. Mm-hmm. What they see in the emails should be representative of what they've done on the website and what they're doing in the, along the site. So far different than what we're seeing today. What we're also seeing is the consumer change a bit. Things that we expect to do with them as we were raising the bar. For instance, I work with Expedia and they have a special. Hey, all Hyatt hotels are 25% off this week. But they have to make a decision, right? They have to figure out which of their database is the one to send it to. Do they send it to everybody because it's a great deal? Do they make decisions such as, only send it to the people who stayed at a Hyatt before? Do you not reach out to the people who have stayed in Holiday Inns and La Quintas but never a Hyatt? So it's a little bit different. And that's putting a lot of pressure on the marketer to figure out what to do differently.
Got it. So thinking through SaaS, legacy ESPs being the SaaS, sort of everything needs to be in their system for it to work appropriately. We're also talking about enterprise marketers, and that's a broad term. So for today's discussion, when we say enterprise marketer, who do we mean?
Sure. Well, there is some room in there for B2B marketers, but in general, it's a B2C marketer. They are working with list sizes in the tens of millions, maybe millions, but generally in the tens. They're names that consumers know by name. They are Expedia, Geico, Hyatt Hotels. Us as consumers, us as marketers, we all know these names. That's generally what it is. They will also be working on maybe not only the email lists sending, but they may also have push notifications, in-app notifications. They may have SMS. They may even be doing, say, a Facebook buy for the site. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a lot different. And that's what they're finding, that that's that big group where they've got a lot of pressure to really step up their marketing.
Let's go back to consumer expectations, because you mentioned consumers evolved. They're expecting different things today than they were maybe 10, 15, even longer than that years ago, from the brands that they do business with. You mentioned the tearing the page out of the catalog, and that used to be kind of the extent of personalization in email, or you didn't have any, it was non-existent. What's driven that consumer expectation change? Why do we as consumers and consumers in general expect something different? Is it technology? Are there brands that are doing it really well?
Yeah, I think all of that, but I think a big driver of it is they're seeing it on the website. They're seeing it within the ad tech. I shop for a vacation to Mexico, and all of a sudden the ads start following me around, right? So it is tailoring to me, right? And that's because there's dollars behind it. The bigger sites, they're starting to figure out, if I do that same type mentality through my ad buying, through the website, and I push it into my messages going out, there's a better conversion rate. And so by doing that, they are seeing better results. The consumer is getting a better experience, and the better consumer experience is turning into better revenues. So it's profitable for them to do. But it's a struggle because a lot of these systems were not set up that way. The website was, the ad tech is, but a lot of times the database that the email marketer is working with was not set up that way. The idea was, a day or two old is only, you're missing a day's worth of people to add to the list. So not such a big difference. But now what the marketer is doing is they're struggling. They're finding that they have, a stale list that's maybe, a day old, and then they have to send it up to their ESP, their legacy ESP. That creates another day, and so now they're a day or two behind. So they're doing little things along the way. They are doing things such as saying, let me create segments. Let me divvy up and create many segments for my audience. And that not only gets them closer so that the content's more targeted, but it's also allowing them to have more work. So now they're busier than ever before, which is probably even slowing them down a little bit and getting to that perfect one email for each consumer because they are now just so busy getting so many campaigns out.
Well, and it seems like that would be a more operationally focused role than
For sure.
actually being a marketer.
Yeah.
Right.
And we'll get into it a little later, but there's a lot of little strategies that they can take, steps that they can do to move their programs forward in addition to this extra work, but there's ways they can pull in better, richer content for the consumers, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay, great. So we've got the legacy sort of SaaS providers that have worked well for a lot of people, have worked well for a number of years, but they're starting to, as consumer expectations change, marketers feel like they should be doing a better job and are trying to, behind the scenes, pull a bunch of strings at once to bring a great experience to their customers. I was reminded recently, right after Black Friday, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was about email marketing, and it basically said consumers don't like email in general, which is sad. They don't feel like the emails that they receive from the brands that they do business with, for the most part, are relevant to them. There was an example in there. There was a woman who was shopping with a retailer. She was on their website, and she was browsing shoes. And I think she didn't pull the trigger and actually buy any shoes that day. And she was expecting some sort of follow-up through email from the brand and expecting an email that either had the shoes that she looked at on sale or a coupon or just some other shoes. Yeah. But she didn't. She got an email the next day about coats, and it offended her. She was mad about that. And this is new territory for marketers.
For sure.
The interesting thing I saw in there too is that the response to that from that retailer was, well, we have all the right tools. We have we bought this thing and we have this other thing and we don't, we have everything in place to deliver a great experience. Where is the disconnect there in your mind?
Yeah, it'd have been interesting because what the article didn't really tell us is what did she receive, a day or two later when the data finally caught up. I imagine that, to their point, they have the right tools or the tools that they've been using for years from these legacy ESPs, but they have to wait for their database to refresh it, 2-3 a.m. and then they have to ship off the data to the legacy ESP and wait for that to save and update. So 2-3 days later, I imagine she would have started seeing some shoes in hers. So that's the problem. Is the expectation is I was on that site, maybe even their ad system is already targeting her with shoes, and yet she gets an email directly from them, from the source, and it's still talking about coats, something that she did months ago. So there's small things that the marketer can do, and there's big things. I think the big thing is to find out, how do I get to that source of truth for the data? How do I run off the same system that the website runs, that the ad tech system is running off, and make sure that my data is fresh and not out of sync and not old and stale? But then there's also small things they can do, and we'll get into some of those, things like working with Movable Ink and finding out what the right content is for each consumer using Persado, and also getting away from looking at a database that's a day old and then shipping your data off somewhere and adding another day onto it. And how do I get to that rich, fresh data so the consumer gets exactly the experience that they're expecting now, like some of their competitors are starting to do?
Well, it's funny. I went to a conference in December, and there was a round table of marketers there, and there was somebody in that round table talking about this sort of data lag issue, right? Where they had a program that was supposed to be running automatically, and the data that they were sending or the personalizing their emails with was stale. And so some people would get an email a day or two later with, thanks for doing this, and that person didn't remember doing that, or had already made a purchase and they were getting a reminder to purchase, that kind of thing. And instead of trying to figure out how to solve that, they're overworked. You mentioned a lot of operational tasks. They just gave up on the program. They said, look, we're going to put this whole thing on pause for now. And until we could figure it out down the road. And that's sad. That's a sad place for marketers to be. And I would think that, it's a sad place for the consumers who want something good out of it. Yeah. So when we think about the legacy ESPs, I mean, why aren't they solving? Did they not see this type of thing coming? This change?
I don't know if they didn't see it coming, but what you're seeing is there's some new competitors, as I mentioned. There's the Movable Link and say a Persado who can help you, dice up and find what the right content is. But I think also there's not some pressure for that. They're trying to, make email part of a bigger system, a marketing cloud, if you will, as opposed to just saying, let's do better email and get a better consumer experience. So I think they've somewhat sidestepped it. And they also always have the problem. You have to ship your data to them, which is going to take, a night to refresh itself. The hard thing though is, to your point about the retailer that sent out the email about coats, they think they have the right tools, and that's what all the legacy, and that's what all the friends do. That's how you do it. That's how we've done it for years. You're starting to see some smaller competitors come along. You're starting to see some pressure from some companies even thinking about building their own ESPs because there's nothing else out there. But there's small things they can do by using these small tools that are coming from innovation and that are being in there. The other is just simply say, how do I get away from shipping my data away and use the data that I have in my database? And then how do I make that even more timely?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I sent email for a retailer for the better part of 9 years, and that was one of the things. It was just like, this is how it's done. Yeah. This is this 24-hour data sync thing. It's going to happen once a day. And that's just the expectation. So we at Message Gears, we did some research late last year. We surveyed some marketers, and some of the findings that came out of that is that not tremendously surprising, marketers aren't in love with their ESPs, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's provocative to say. I think that's
you can go to any conference,
pretty common.
Same thing. Yeah.
They feel like they have challenges, yet they're staying with them for a while. And one of the stats that was out of it, 40% of B2C companies that send over 100 million emails a month. That's a lot of email.
For sure.
They had been with their ESP for 5 or more years. So 40% had been with their ESP for that long. Why is that? I mean, is just like this is how we do it, so we're just stuck with this? Or why would they stay with somebody they don't love for a long period?
There's probably some of that. I mean, change is never, I'll say easy. But I think the bigger piece is that they look at what what all the landscape is, and they say, I'm moving from one legacy ESP to another. I'm moving from Responses and Oracle to a Salesforce with the old Exact Target, or I can choose Epsilon or Experian. It's kind of the same. So why would I go through all that to end up in the same place where I have to do what? Ship my data away. Make a copy of my data, save it somewhere far away, and still run off of at least 24, if not 48 hours old data, and ship out emails with coats when they're supposed to have shoes in them, right? So that's the piece. They don't know that there's other things out there, and they get stuck and they say, well, it's the devil I know, and it's technology that's the same as everywhere you go.
There's no incentive to change.
Yeah, they don't know that there's a way they can work off of their database, live data in real time. Right. And you can these days. That's the big piece. That's the thing that's kind of changing the landscape. And that's what we're seeing. For those that, need to grab some information that, they can't get in a database, they can't work off those. There are some solutions. We've seen, like, say, Movable Link can go and grab content off of the website, scrape it and bring it into an email. That's about as fresh as you're ever going to get. And, consumers and even the marketers, they trust the data that's on the website. They know that data is updated on a continuous basis. Many times the databases that they work off are not. And that's where you get that frustration of, how do I get to that data? Long term, move to that database. Short term, grab some of the innovative companies, work off the data that you have rather than making a copy and shipping it away.
That's interesting, kind of segging into solutions for marketers that, again, if they feel like they should be doing a better job, but they're overworked, they don't have a lot of, they don't have a lot of time, they don't have a lot of resources on their hands. I think any marketing team member you would talk to at any company would say, oh yeah, we're short-staffed. We don't have that many people. Yeah. Let's talk through some of the solutions. You mentioned the website being a trustworthy source of that real-time data, right?
Generally.
Like, if you're grabbing stuff from there, you can generally say that's about as fresh as it is. There's ways to do that with email, right? I mean, that hadn't been possible or hadn't been thought of in the past.
The secret sauce is, not so secret. It's go grab where that database is running off of. Whatever live, database that's pulling from, production database, that's the data you need. And that's, I think, where a lot of these email marketers get stuck, is they're told that they can't get to there, or they haven't proven the case of why they need that. I worked with a large hotel company, and they were talking about how a consumer could check into one of their hotels and check out before they even got the data that said you'd actually made the reservation or you checked in or checked out. So, the consumer saying there, I just stayed with you and I didn't get a welcome. I didn't get a, here's your checkout. I got a bill, but that's about it. There's no, hey, there's a happy hour going on in the bar. There's a specials going on in our restaurant. There's things to do around, the property. But their system doesn't update. One database had to save, and a second database had to save, and then they shipped all their data off to the ESP. It was literally 3 days later of the data they're working off. I'm in and out of the hotel and on to the next one. Yeah. Trip is done. But there's small things. Again, in this case, they were grabbing some of the technology from Mobile Inc. and scraping off how many points you had or when your last day was. There is, they're looking to do a way that says, okay, the app sees that, they geo-fence that particular property, and as you check in and as you check out, then they know that you've, completed that stay, and they can use that data. Now, granted, the app isn't, not every single consumer that stays with them uses the app, but those that do get a better experience. And this is, again, where you take those small steps and begin to move as you go, sell to your company. I have to be using the production database. So my results are live, so I don't send coats when I'm supposed to be talking about shoes, just like the ad team does.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know for a fact, because they're a client of ours, Expedia works off that real-time data. And I took a trip recently, and like you said, I checked into the hotel. I got an email within 15 minutes of me checking in saying, "How was check-in? How was your trip?"
Now look at the irony of that one. They aren't the hotel company, and yet they know when you checked in, right? Because they're using that production database. This one is using a database which makes a copy of a database that then ships the database off to the ESP.
So
they're 3 days, and you stayed with the same company, right? And Expedia knew something that you didn't know.
So the central source of truth, that central database is really the key here, right? And that's why the website has
the end goal, if you will.
Right, the end goal, right? So that's why the website's got the freshest data possible. It lives directly where that central source of truth lives.
And when you get to that, then the consumer experience is the same. I'm on a website, I book the trip, or I don't book the trip, and then the ad team follows me around. I finally see that. You send me an email. It's all talking about go to Mexico, go to Mexico, go to Mexico. I book the trip, I check in, I check out. And all the communication feels like you know me, right? Like I'm
seamless.
Yeah, like I'm a valued customer of yours.
So what are ways that marketers can tap into that central source of truth for email? I mean, what are the solutions?
So the big piece is you can't make a copy of that database and ship it away. You have to get access to that database, whether it's a copy of the production or whether it's ideally production, just like the ad team does, just like the website does. And you've got to find those. And it's the same story, whether it's a movie business, whether it's Walmart that I've worked with in the past. They know these things work. They've been having these programs go. I bought or I didn't buy a certain product, and they have a whole series of triggers that falls after that. And those make money. Those are great programs that drive sales. And I've heard fears like, oh, maybe we're sending too many emails. The consumers will tell you no. They turn these programs off for a little bit, thinking that they're mailing too much. Revenues plummet, and guess what? The unsubscribed save just at the same level that they were. So consumers voting with their unsubscribe button, if you will, and with their pocketbook. And the retailers that have this down, they're working off of that fresh data that say, I see that you left something in the cart. They're the ones making out.
They're using that fresh data. Have they built their own system? They're finding workarounds to their legacy.
And they're
provider,
taking a
right?
long-term plan, sure, to get there. That's for sure. Yeah, we've definitely seen. There's a few companies out there that have looked at the legacy ESPs and said, this is just never going to work. This is never going to get better. They're all, in a sense, they're all the same, right?
Yeah.
Some have decided they're going to go build their own, but they do it only out of frustration. It's not that they want to get in the business. It's not what their business is. It's not what their forte is. And yet they say, this is core enough to my business that if someone isn't going to fix this as a supplier, as a partner, then I have to go do it myself. But clearly they don't want to. What they want to find is, a hybrid solution that works off of that database behind their firewall and can get the data, get the emails out as quickly as possible.
It would seem that there's some advantages to building your own thing with, having it custom to what you need, but then there's
Sure.
a lot of disadvantages.
Mostly
trying
disadvantage.
to keep up with the.
As I say, I don't think anyone does it because I think it's a great idea. I think they think this is something I only do out of frustration, right? Yeah. Now I've also seen, there's ways that, even when there's a hole in the data, like I worked with a large car maker before. It's the manufacturer, you're on their website, you're choosing your car, but there's always going to be ways where you lose some data. Most companies, unless you're completely online, say probably Expedia is completely online, but if you're not, if you're that hotel company, there's going to be times people walk in the hotel and just check in. That's okay. Like those pieces are okay, that if you miss some data, in the case of the automaker, eventually you may go on the dealer's website. You may walk in and talk to a salesman on the lot. That's okay. But you build those pieces of data so that you can build a picture, you can follow the consumer, and when you have the data, you can act upon it. But that's the crime, is many of these marketers, they have the data, and yet they don't know how to act upon it in real time that makes the consumer feel welcome. So you find those pieces, and those pieces can be things like MoveLink and grabbing and finding out exactly what the consumer is doing with Persado, making small moves towards using your production database, ending this cycle of sending your data off to a legacy ESP and tacking on another 24 hours, looking for hybrid of where you use your data behind your firewall. All these pieces add up together, and it by cutting hours and hours and hours or grabbing pieces that are live within the email, it's a better experience for the consumer, and it helps the marketers see results so that they can then tell their management, this is something we need to move towards.
So the end goal is really it's the end goal, and how you can get better at personalization seems to be
for sure
just not copying your data somewhere else. Eliminate the data silos one by one as much as possible.
Because there's no value add in it, right? Like you ship your data off, you add 24 hours, and what result do you get back? The data is not better. It's not more complete. There's no appending or matching up of results. It doesn't value add. So in that way, that's the biggest piece. I mean, there you lop off a day right off the bat, and it's a day that adds no value.
Okay.
Certainly.
We have a few questions that have been coming in here.
Okay.
And so it's first one, wouldn't it be harder to do the migration with a hybrid on-premises? And that's actually a great point. SaaS, one of the reasons it was sort of this savior thing was, as a marketing team, I could just cut out IT, and I could own everything myself. I knew how it worked, and everything super nuts. I kind of wrapped my arms around as a marketer. It does seem like it would be more difficult to do something custom that's working off your internal database.
Sure. Years ago, when all this got started, it was easier. A marketer could just work with, say, a exact target. They didn't need to talk to the IT team. But as the files got bigger, as you added more data within that file gets so large, eventually it would fail somewhere, and then you have to run to the IT team. How come my file didn't save? How come my file didn't ship up? How come it didn't save in the cloud? Eventually they have to talk to IT, and what we're finding is all the marketers today are talking, unless you're again tearing that page out of a Pottery Barn catalog and sending that out blank. There's going to be some interaction with the IT, and what they're finding is those who are integrating with the IT team, they get better data, they're getting a richer file, they're getting more profile data on their consumers, they can personalize their emails better. So they're working with IT anyway in the end. And they're getting a better product and better results. So in a sense, there's no reason to skip working with IT, and IT can enable them. So if they're going to be doing that, then they might as well get the rich, fresh data rather than shipping it off and letting the legacy ESP handle everything. When they do that, what they find is they're actually able to send those campaigns out more effectively. And so to your point, is it harder to work with, when you have your data behind your firewall? In general, no. What they find is that they, in fact, since they already have their IT team working with them, and the IT team is building in all these processes to make sure that the file is saved and sent up correctly and saved correctly in the cloud. As they move to cutting out the middleman, they don't have all those checks and balances. They don't have the places where they have to run and check and see if the file actually saved. They cut out the middleman, and they actually save 40% of ITT's time in doing these type of things. So migration is not harder. It's actually strangely easier with no data mapping.
Great. How would you suggest I begin getting buy-in from my team for changing ESPs? I guess this kind of goes the same thing. I mean, if you're having to work with IT, it seems like you're going to have to talk to them. You're going to have to talk to other, finance perhaps,
Yep.
Customer service. But how do you start getting buy-in from the team for changing ESPs?
Sure. Well, I think the big piece is you have to figure out what are those pain points. And I think everyone would agree the idea of shipping your data off and losing 24 hours of relevancy, again, that example of the coats versus the shoes, right? Yeah, it's bad from the beginning. So, but the other side is to figure out, make sure you're not jumping from one pot into another pot, that you're going to actually cut out that 24 hours, because that won't be productive and you won't have a good reason to move. But if you're able to cut out the middleman, if you're able not to ship your data far away, if you're able to use the data live, then you're going to have a much better product. And that's where you begin. I can see that as we bring fresher data in, more relevant to the consumer, they respond better and revenues go up. Therefore, that's where we should be moving. So I think that's a good place to start. I think the other pieces are to look at things, as we mentioned earlier, some partners that can, that are innovating, that can help you add pieces to that in a very simple manner. That may even save some operational pain that you're having today and brings in better content, which gets you better results, which then makes the whole story easier.
That's great. And it looks another one here. Any examples of things you've seen happen with hybrid that you weren't able to do before? You mentioned a few examples.
Yeah.
With Expedia being able to send that real-time email, I brought up. Are there any other examples from any retailers or?
What's interesting is when you don't have to do this data mapping, suddenly you can move very quickly on the different fields. Many times the marketing team will want to add a new field, but what they go to the legacy ESP, and it's 3 months before they can get a field now data mapped into there. When you were working off of the production database, or when you're working off of your own database, you can move very quickly. You can add a field, you can bring in data, you can change a whole program's direction on a dime in a matter of a couple hours. We had one client that onboarded with us, and what they found was a program that the legacy ESP's professional services team took 9 months to build and never really got to what the client wanted. We had one of our implementation engineers sit with them for an afternoon, and in the span of after lunch until the day they went home, in a single afternoon, had the program up and running exactly how they'd wanted the whole time.
Just because they had the fresh data and that
fresh data and not
problems.
Shipping the file off, right? You're looking straight at the source of truth, and they were able to put the program together instantly, which is what they'd always wanted, but they couldn't do that because the architecture is not correct. They're shipping the data away. So yeah, very easy.
Great. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to thank everybody here for taking a half hour out of your day. This will be archived at messagegears.com for your viewing. We'll also send everybody that's watching here a copy of the report, the ESP Satisfaction Report, which is there's other great resources and insights also available at messagegears.com. But we'll send everybody a copy. If you're interested in learning more about MessageGears, we are convinced hybrid works. We've seen it happen time and time again. Large volume, if you're a large volume B2C business, you're curious or you're feeling stuck, reach out or messagegears.com. We offer a free proof of concept. We'll let you try it out. Let you see what it feels like to have the no mapping, no syncing, no data lag. So we appreciate everybody's time today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.